the terminal, and we'll just paste in that command, add a space and a dot so we can install it in the current directory. And for this project, we'll say no to TypeScript, yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to the SRC, yes to the app router, no to the turbo pack, no to the import alias, and we'll give it a few minutes to finish installing. And before we spin up the application, let me do a couple things. First, make sure that this is the latest version of Next and React is compatible with all the dependencies. So back to the package.json and paste that in. And for right now, we'll just close that out. In the app directory, let's this div and replace it with div that has homepage enclosed. And then the last thing we'll do for right now is in the root directory, let's just go ahead and remove the existing default CSS, and we'll just add some optional CSS that's not necessarily relevant to the project functionality, but just for styling purposes, how I like to have it. So this is just saying for the HTML body, the HTML itself and the root, we want to designate, we also need to include, so for HTML, body, root, and app, we want to set the height to 100%, and we'll say at apply, text to small. Save this, and we'll confirm that it's working later. For right now, what I want to do is go ahead and set up Prisma. It will be the choice, and we'll be connecting to a Postgres database via Vercel. So to kick us off, we'll type npm i-d Prisma, and this is going to install Prisma as a dev dependency. Seconds to finish installing. We want to install the Prisma client, and you going through the docs, but it is listed there. That's npm i Prisma /client. We want to initialize Prisma. We'll do so is by typing npx prisma init. Add a Prisma directory with a Prisma file. We need to update the database and add our models within this file. So let's go ahead and add our database now. In Vercel, login, and with GitHub. Already be done, but because I'm in a private browser, I'm going to have to re-log in, but it's going to take a moment. Once you're logged in, you're able to use a free tier. Obviously, I have a tier, $20 a month for the level of service that I have, but you can do this for free. And what you want to do is on this particular window, is once you logged in, it should default to the overview page. Click on storage. And what we want to do is create a database. Which one do I want to use? And create a database, and we'll be creating a Postgres database. Click continue. Name this my app. Feel free to name it whatever you like. Click create on the .env.local, and we'll copy and we'll replace the database string that's already there with what we just copied. Now be the database. Then we'll click on Prisma. Just copy the database source, for our database, and then we'll just replace schema.prisma file with what we just copied from. So we actually are done with Vercel for this project. Now I want to add some authentication, and we're going to use Authjs for that. So we'll just go to docs. I'm going to get started. Of course, we're using Nextjs, so we'll follow the quick start guide for Nextjs. Install the next-auth at beta command. Need a auth secret, and this should be stored within our environment variable. We paste it in, and it's going to add a secret. Feel free to customize this so that it's more secure than what I have here. And we'll also add this file to the .git ignore. That way when we send this to GitHub, this file is ignored. I'm gonna add the auth.ts file directory and auth.ts. Want to add handler, copy everything from to the closing bracket that has the dot off or 3 dots to next off. And then we'll go to the app directory, add a folder, and paste in the copied or text that we just copied from the docs. And then while the arrow caret is pointing down, let's add a file named route.ts. Want to add the handlers, and of course we're going to be using get and post. We'll paste that in and save the file. Worry about any middleware for this project, but next up we'll need to add the adapters using Prisma, of course. So first up, we'll need to install the Prisma client again and the Prisma adapter. We'll probably have to install the client again, but I'm just going to, since it is suggested there. First step is to access on the Prisma docs, but we've already done that. To install Prisma. While it is installing, the next thing we'll need to do is Prisma function, and we're just going to copy it just as is and place it in a file named prisma.ts. So in the root directory, let's add a folder first named lib, and inside of it, add a file named prisma.ts. Then the function that we copied from the docs. Up inside of the auth.ts, we need to bring in the Prisma adapter and then distinguish the adapter as the Prisma adapter, and run inside of that function is the Prisma function that we just created. So first, inside of the auth.ts, we'll go ahead and paste in the adapter. Then we'll need to add adapter and set it equal to the Prisma adapter. Right now, we are getting back on Prisma. So what I'm gonna do to bring in the correct Prisma version is add the M&A at the end of Prisma once I deleted it, and it should automatically recommend to bring it in from the // Prisma file that we just created. And it did. We'll click save. Not going to be impacted by the ability in this project, but now we do need to copy the model and it within the Prisma file. So I'm going to copy everything snippet except for the database source, and you could have copied it, but you'll need to remove the duplicate because that's already within the file. So if I go back to schema.prisma, it in, and we don't need the authenticator model, so we can go ahead and remove that model, and we'll need to remove it from the user model as well. So this is almost perfect. The only thing we'll need to do now is add the client model. And once we add the client model, make sure that there's a relation between the client model and the user, because we want the user to have the ability to get all of their created clients, as this is a personal client tracker. In the model directory, was the schema.prisma file. Let's add a model named client. For the model, go ahead and copy the E. You'll need it to distinguish each particular model, each client model, excuse me. Clients will have, store that as a string a little bit. Clients will, they'll have a, I think we'll give them, did a name. What else do we want them to have? I know we want total as a float, so we could just go ahead and include that now. We'll say a float, created that and updated that just so we can store it. I think, is there anything else? I feel like I am something to want to have with this model. Status is going to be a string. Set the status to be num eventually. And the way we'll go about doing that is a default for the status. That way, when we create it, it'll automatically have a default value. So we'll say at default. So the default will be unpaid. Unpaid. This is either going to be paid, or we'll just keep the string at UU. Yep, default to that. All right. So now with this updated, to do next is relation between the client and the user. So I'll go to the user first, and we'll just say clients. Be client as a empty array. Side of the clients, we can remove that. I want the user. Let's say user. Store this as a string, and then we'll say user related to the user model at relation fields fields user email to reference the email that, and we'll say on delete we want to cascade. Good. So with this cared for, the next thing we want to do before we change this to the database is go ahead and add in the Google authentication. So if we go back to the docs, to providers, provider for this project is going to be Google, and there's a ton of them you can add. The process is going to be fairly simple or fairly similar to this, but big thing is to make sure that you are creating or caring for the callback. So we'll need the store the Google ID and the Google secret in our environment variables. That in there. And where we'll get these from is from the Google console. I already have a Google account. I think I'm probably at the max right now. So if you need help with setting one up, it's super simple. I'll include a link in the bio of how to set one up. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this information from an existing project that I already have. Just a moment to get logged in. I think I'm at my max of how many projects I can create at this point between school and just personal things I've been working on. But it's okay. I'll be sure to delete and start from scratch for those that might need it. So we'll just go to credentials once you're logged in. I'm gonna grab the client ID from right here. You click inside of the web app. I just named mine web client. Feel free to name it whatever you want as you're going through the setup. The secret next, paste it in. Be sure to save and close this out. And the big thing is when you are setting one up, you need to make sure that the authorized redirect is set to this. One way to troubleshoot it if you set it up incorrectly is to really leverage the console, the terminal. If you do that, it'll basically tell you what's missing, whether it's an off secret or whether it's the callback isn't set up properly. And if you Google the error message, you can find the correct way to set it up. But there's a ton of videos on YouTube, and I'm going to put one that I've set up previously in the description that you can reference. It's just for this project. I'm not going to worry about setting one up. So once you've added the environment variables, next up, you want to update the auth.ts file by bringing in the Google here. So we'll go to auth.ts, Google there, and go to providers. Keep going. We're not going to worry about any of this information. So now we are ready to push these changes to our database, Prisma, so that it now has all of the models that we have created within the schema.prisma file. And I think if we go to the others, probably was in this too. I think this is it right here. That's the command that we want, but it's right here as well. ready to push these changes to the database. I'm gonna paste in this command npm c prisma migrate dev and press enter, telling me that we have an error. Email string got oops, this the email that looks good. String this to default now. That looks like I might have forgot a colon. Came in the room. Let's try this command again. Good now. It's gonna ask me to where we will been updated successfully. And last but not least, we'll run npx prisma generate. Now we are ready to see or to test out the authentication to make sure that it works. So we'll run the command npm run dev, open a new terminal, and type in the command npx prisma studio. And this is just going to give me a interface via Prisma, just so we can see what's being stored in the database. So as of right now, we don't have any users, but we do see the columns for the table. So we'll just go ahead and minimize this for right now. Go to host 3000, see home page. So now let's work on bringing in or confirming that the application is working. So we'll close out the schema.prisma file and the auth.ts. We no longer need it. So minimize the terminal, close it out. Back to the root directory. Let's create a folder named components. Let's add a file or folder named header. Also add a folder named sidebar. I want to organize the files a little bit, the routes a little bit. So in the root directory, inside app folder, let's create a route grouping named website. And the way we create a grouping is to enclose it with parentheses. So I'll do open parentheses website, close parentheses, drag the page.tsx that's in the app directory inside of the website directory. I want to create a separate layout associated with layout, and I'm just going to copy the children in the children.node React node that was passed in. That out inside of the website directory. Let's add a file named layout.tsx. Use the RFCE snippet to create a export default of layout. In the children that we just copied, and then within the div enclosed in brackets, we'll pass in children. That way we now have a separate layout file for and passing in props or whatever else we want to use it for. So let's go ahead and bring in the header component that we just created. So at the top of the file, import with a capital H header. The file, yeah, we just created the folder, sorry. So let's go back to the inside of components. Let's add a folder inside of the header folder named header.tsx. We'll create the function or const named header. Be sure that you capitalize it. And I'm just going to replace this div tag, header within the tag. Close this out, go back to the layout, and above the children, I want the header to be of the put on top of the main layout. So if you bring the header in, and the way I brought it in is by typing the lowercase bracket capital HEAD, and it'll automatically come up with recommendations. And I just found the one that is at component/header/header. Click save and go back to localhost. That we now have header and home page on the screen. So to bring in imports, it is working properly. So now let's just see if we have and thanks so much for the shout out, my friend Vashal. But let's see or confirm that the information is working. So I'm gonna go back to the installation down, and we'll go to Auth. It is, here's the sign-in component. So I'm just gonna copy this. Inside of the header directory, let's add a file named sign-in-btn.tsx. Actually can just copy the code that we just copied from the documentation. Basically what we have is a function that's going to run sign in from the auth provider, and we'll be leveraging the Google sign in because that is the OAuth provider that we've configured within the project. So we can just go ahead and save this, and then back inside of the root directory, inside of components, inside of the header folder, let's add another file named sign out btn.tsx, paste in this code, but instead of it saying sign in, we'll just change it to sign out. Instead of it awaiting sign in, we want to grab sign out, and be sure you are bringing this in from @/auth, and it should look like this, and we actually can remove sign in. Sign out, we no longer need to call out or distinguish Google within the function, so we can remove that. And then last but not least, instead of it saying sign in with Google, let's just have sign out for right now. Save. So for right now, we can close those out. And to make sure or to see if this is working, we're going to go back to the header component. First thing we'll need to do is mark this as a asynchronous. Reason being is because we'll be making a request and we're going to have to await a response back from the server. So we need to make sure that our components align with the action that will be. So we'll start by setting this as asynchronous, and then we'll create a const named session and set it equal to await. And what we need to await is auth. And the easiest way to bring this in, or how I like to bring it in, is begin to type out AUTH. Notice that the first option is @/auth. So if you press enter, it's going to automatically import it. Now we just need to call this particular function. And the way we call it, same way we'll call any function, is by the open and close parentheses after it. Want to have a const user email just so that we can see the user's information, and we're going to set this equal to session user.email. Be sure to include the question marks after session and after user, and then .email. That way we're caring for the possibility that we may not have a session and how we want to, based on not having a session. So last but not least, what I want to do is display a sign in and sign out button in the event we have a session. So if we have a session, I want to show sign out, and I also want to show the user's email just so we can see what user is logged in. And if we don't have a session, we want to show the sign in button and give the user the ability to log in via Google. So the way we'll do that is by doing this. Let's add inside of the header, remove the text, and let's add a nav tag. And for right now, what I'm do is let's just see it on screen. So inside of the nav tab, we're going to want to run some conditional JavaScript. And the way we run JavaScript inside of a React application is by enclosing it with curly braces. So we'll start with curly braces, then say session with a question mark. Out of it, we want to pass in 2 parentheses, which will represent what we're going to do if we have a session. And if we don't have a session, we're going to have the colon there, which represents or. We'll pass in 2 additional parentheses. And I'm going to just pass in some fragments for right now. And both, so we no longer are getting an error message and React is no longer upset with us. So if we have a session, what I want to do is I want to show the number one, a sign out button, because that means that we already have a logged in user. So instead of instead of the fragments, I'm going to replace it with a div. We'll give it a class name of flex and item centered. And I'll put a little bit of space. We're going to change this later, but I just want to have something on screen for right now. First thing I want to show is the user email, and that is the variable that we created here. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to show sign out. And this is going to come from ./signout/btn, which is the component that we just created. And so this is saying that if we have a session, we want to see the user email and sign out. And if we don't have a session, then we want to see sign in. Import that the same way. So now we have conditional rendering in the event we have a session and if we don't. So let's just save the file and go back to localhost and see what we have. Refresh the screen. So now you see we're currently showing sign in with Google. So this means that we don't have a session. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on sign in with Google. Follow the steps from there. We're being redirected, which is a great sign. We're gonna log in with the JA. We'll click continue. This is the name of our project that we are reusing. Your name if you created a new Google project. And then now, once we've signed in, you see that it now says the jadad@gmail.com, and we have the ability to sign out. Make sure this is working and make sure, well, we see the authentication is working, but let's make sure that we are saving or persisting the user in the database. And the way we'll check it is by going to our Prisma studio. And I think if we just go to localhost 5555, press enter. That's going to take us to our Prisma Studio. And if we click on user, see that we now have a user persisted within the database. So this means that anytime we have a logged in user, if they logging in for the first time, we're going to be able to see them stored within the database. We can see that this user doesn't have any clients, correct? We do have one account and one session associated with this logged in user. So perfect. This appears to be working perfectly. So we've set up the ability to, we've set up the connection to Prisma, Postgres using Prisma as the ORM. We've also set up Google authentication so we can secure our website. And we've also used the Prisma adapter to store the user within our Postgres database. That way we're able to store the session and also their Google account. So users can now create clients and also maintain authentication on our website. So with the first portion of the heavy lifting cared for, the next thing we want to do is set up the overall design.